I've sifted more tall tales than trail dust. This one rides straight. A $70 rancher opens a Tuesday letter and hits a frozen ranch, a tree that remembers, and a vault that thunks like judgment. Law rides in, blood flecks freeze, and the real gold ain't coins. It's what you know and who you keep. Saddle up. The Tuesday cold came on like a knife laid flat against the skin, not cutting yet, just promising to. The stove breathed a thin, stubborn thread of smoke and very little heat. Jed Rourke stood in his shirt sleeves anyway, a man tight with fuel and with feeling, counting what could be counted. $17 sat pinched in a rusty money clip, damp at the edges, soft from too many pockets. Beside it lay his hat, brim dusted with powder snow he'd brushed off at the door. The dog, Buck, thumped his tail once and then put his nose to the crack beneath the threshold. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Out on the porch, something small skittered, then quieted. The pendulum clock on the shelf ticked slow and thoughtful, as if the winter had thickened even time. May moved careful, as if sound cost money. She eased a single stick onto the stingy fire, then cupped her hands to it and breathed on her knuckles. The girl's cheeks held the red of chapped apples. Her eyes were clear and watchful, the way eyes get when life has used up its surprises, but keeps throwing them anyway. A knock, no, not a knock, more the soft slide of paper under wood. Buck wuffed. Jed opened the door on its complaining hinge and found a yellowed envelope sleeping against the jamb like a stray cat that had decided on a house. The stamp was half-licked, the address neat and certain. Snow pushed in with the door, little white birds trying to fly indoors and dying on the floorboards. He turned the envelope in his hands, felt the grittum of old dust, the way the paper had gone soft around its corners. He laid it on the table and pressed its edge flat with a thumb calloused from years of rope and ice and wagon lines. The clock ticked once, then again, like a man clearing his throat before he speaks. May stood beside him, just close enough to share whatever came. "Pa," she said, voice low as a church hallway, "this could be bait." "Reckon it could," he said, "but whoever wrote it knows my name." He slit it with the tip of his pocketknife, careful as a surgeon with his last clean blade. Inside lay a deed, the county seal bled pale by time, and a single sheet of lined paper with handwriting that leaned forward like a man in a hurry. Jed read without moving his lips, the way men do when words might bite. Micah Brewer, it said at the top, a name he knew, the way you know. I know a town you once passed through and never stopped at. The letter spoke plain, an inheritance, 200 acres, and a note too simple to trust. Find the place where the oak stands alone. He set the paper down and picked it up again, as if weight could tell between truth and trick. Buck nosed the envelope, sneezed, and looked up, waiting for the work in it. Outside, the wind ran a hand over the roof shingles and found every place the nails had loosened. May reached past him and closed the door against it. 200 acres, she whispered, almost to herself. Out here, that's a word men lie over. Jed folded the deed once, then again, squares inside squares, and slid it back into its coat. The stove ticked from heat the way the clock ticked from habit. Doubt stood in the room with them, solid as another chair at the table. Yet somewhere under it, a seam of warmth began to show, thin as the line where dawn thinks about coming. He took his hat from the chair back, shook the snow from the brim, and set it on. If it's bait, he said, we'll see the hook before we swallow. He lifted the letter once more, read the line a final time, and let it settle into him, like a map burned to memory. Find the place where the oak stands alone. He glanced at the money clip, at the $17 that wouldn't stretch to spring, then at May's small hand resting on Ellen's old wool scarf, hanging by the door. The clock's pendulum swung, and for the first time that morning, kept good time. Outside, the sky had that pewter look it gets when more weather is coming. Jed opened the door, and the cold leaned in, friendly as a creditor. He stepped onto the porch, Buck at his heel, and looked out over the white that had claimed everything he knew. Somewhere in all that blankness there was a tree waiting. "Come on," he said to the dog, to the cold, to the doubt itself. "Let's go find it." They took the old flatbed because it still had chains on 2 tires, and because a man doesn't walk 5 miles of ice if he can ride it. The road into Frost Gulch was a ribbon of glass, rutted hard where the last thaw had lied about spring. The truck rattled like a mason jar full of bolts. Snow lay in the sage like flour on whiskers. The sky kept its pewter promise. Jed drove the way you handle a skittish horse. Hands light, eyes far. May rode close in her coat, Ellen's wool scarf snug at her throat. Buck rode the cab floor, head on his paws, ears tilting at each new noise. They didn't talk much. The heater huffed and gave what it could. The place showed itself by degrees, a fence line shouldered over by drifts, a mailbox bent like a tired man, then the house, a square of gray timbers settling into themselves. Roof sagged in the middle like a sleep gone bad. The barn out back had a sway to it, a tired mule ready to kneel. Window frames held only wind. Everything looked hollow and watchful. Jed eased the truck to a stop. The engine clicked as it cooled. Wind pressed its face to the windows to see who'd come. May stepped down first and brushed the snow from a cold door pull with the back of her glove. "Feels shut a long time," she said, almost to the door itself. "Let's see if it remembers us," Jed said. The hinge complained. He set a shoulder to it, then lifted the door a hair and got it to swing. Inside smelled of old wood and dust and a winter that had never left. There was a stove, older than his, and a table with one leg shimmed by a folded newspaper. He knelt, pried along the floor with 2 fingers, and something gave, just a hair. He noted it and let it be for the moment. A house tells you things in the order it wants. On the porch step, half sunk in ice, May's boot struck tin. She scraped at it with her heel and worked loose a rust-scarred box, lid gridded shut. Jed took his knife and pried. The lid let go with a sigh. Inside, a hand-drawn map. Map with symbols he didn't know, a key fat and black with tarnish, and a photograph sealed in a crackled sleeve. He held the photo so the light could find it. A man stood in a winter coat with a brimmed hat, and a look you could mistake for his own if you didn't believe in years. The date inked neat in the corner made the air colder, 40 years back. May leaned in, cheek close to his shoulder. "Ain't right," Jed said, soft. "Feels like it's staring back." He put the key in his palm, weighing it. It had the gravity of a thing made for one job and no other. On the map, a crooked hand had drawn lines and marks, and at the edge what might have been a tree sketched darker than anything else. He could hear Ellen's voice from a long-ago night when the lamp was low. "There's always a landmark, Jed. Men forget, but trees remember." He walked a slow circle of the house, testing the boards, listening for hollows. Found a hinge split on the inside of the back door and set it right with a square nail from his pocket. Small kindness to a place that might yet shelter them. May shook snow from a cracked frame on the wall, but the glass fell clean away. No picture inside, only the ghost of where one had been. She set the empty frame upright on the table and wiped its edge with the cuff of her sleeve. Buck had been patient. Then he wasn't. The dog whined, pushed his head against Jed's knee, then took a mouthful of coat and tugged. He trotted to the porch, looked back, and trotted again down the steps, tail flagging once. "Easy," Jed said, but he followed. The yard ran white to a flat meadow, where the wind had planed the drifts. Beyond it, up against the iron sky, stood a single black oak, the kind that outlives fences and argument. Buck looked from Jed to the tree and back again, as if the work in the letter had finally stood up and introduced itself. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Up close, the oak looked like a survivor of old arguments, limbs thick as rafters, bark ridged and black with thaw and freeze. Snow feathered the windward side. The lee lay scoured clean as bone. Jed put his palm to the trunk the way a man greets a mule he doesn't know yet. Cold came through his glove like a warning, and then steadied. There were marks, not one but many, the old scars men leave when they want time to remember for them. He brushed away a rime with the back of his sleeve. Letters showed, cut deliberate and deep. MB plus EC. The plus sign was a little crooked, as if the knife had shivered when it went in. May leaned close till her breath made a milk fog on the bark. Frost took the fog back quick, but she'd seen enough. "Mama left her sign," she said, voice small and sure. "Right in the cold wood." Below the letters, nailed square into living bark, a thin sliver of silver lay flat, no bigger than a matchstick. The nail was old and black. The metal had a dull glow like moonlight under a thin cloud. Jed pried gently with his knife until the sliver rocked and caught a ray from the iron sky. A star stamped in the metal woke and winked, sharp points, ink black in the grooves, like the last kiss of a press. He turned it in his fingers, careful as you'd pour medicine, and felt more than weight. "Printer's mark," he murmured, almost to Ellen. She set type, set truth. The dog circled twice and sat facing the tree, as if it were speaking in a language only he and the dead understood. Wind slipped between the limbs and said a dry yes. They stood there long enough for their toes to argue, then went back to the house with the silver tucked safe in Jed's pocket. Inside, the cold was a quieter thing, and May shut the door with 2 hands against the wind. Jed took Ellen's wool scarf from its peg, the one he'd hung back that morning without thinking, and pulled it up snug under May's chin. It smelled faintly of soap and winters when the lamp burned late for writing. The boards under the table had a talkative spot he'd found earlier. He knelt with his pocket knife and a carpenter's patience. The plank lifted with a groan like an old man standing. Underneath, oilcloth tied neat with twine gone gray. He worked the knot loose and unrolled a journal that kept the ghost of machine oil and ink. Micah Brewer's name on the first page in a hand that spent its life leaning forward. Jed sat at the table. The pendulum clock counted out the room, steady, unafraid. May set the silver sliver beside the book so it could catch what light there was. She perched her hip on the chair's edge and laid her palm flat on the table, the way you steady a jittery colt. He opened the journal near the middle. Lines ran tight and close. A man hoarding words the way other men hoard food. Talk of travel and trades, of coins bought from men who didn't know what they had, of history worth more than gold if kept clean. Between entries, little, pressed leaves, a train stub, a corner of newsprint with Ellen's byline clipped and saved. Jed turned a page. The dog's tail clicked once against the leg of the chair. May's breath made clouds he could see put in the cold band of light from the window. He read, and the room narrowed to the thin path of ink. Collection now north of 100 down Mountain. Useless in the wrong hands. Knowledge moves it safe. Family keeps it true. The words sat up like a man from sleep. Jed felt something tilt inside him. The floor of his doubt, maybe, then settle again on new footings. He looked at May and saw her seeing him, how the line put iron and worry in the same place and called both by name. The clock's pendulum hiccuped on its swing, a tiny stutter like a throat catching before a hard truth. Then it carried on steady as a marshal's boot heel in a quiet street. The engine came thin through the cold, a sewing machine in the next room. Buck's head came up first, then a low workman's growl. Jed closed the journal and set a palm on it. May reached without looking and slid the silver sliver closer. The little star turned belly down against the wood. Tires rasped on crusted snow. A car nosed past the gate and took the yard slow, like it already owned the place. When the door opened, the wind tried to come in with the man, but he stepped through ahead of it. Black shoes making deep ovals, a coat that had never met chores, breath fogging neat from a careful mouth. "Whitlock Crane," he said, and a glossy card appeared between two fingers, as if the cold didn't trouble paper or men like him. Consolidated Range and Mineral. Jed let the silence eat the card. He didn't take it. Men used to talk for themselves. Now their paper did. Whitlock's eyes did a quick way of the room, the way a buyer tempts a barrel and listens. Stove, table, cracked window, journal under Jed's hand, the scarf at May's foot. "Rough winter," Whitlock said, voice smooth as oiled hinges. "Your land's a burden. I'll carry it." "Yes, sir." Jed tipped his chin toward the door. "What tells you it's mine?" Whitlock smiled like a lesson. "County filings tell most things if you know where to listen, and a man doesn't drive this far to see nobody." His gaze flicked past Jed's shoulder to the window. From there you could catch a sliver of the meadow, and if you knew what you were looking for, the line of a lone oak, gone black against the pewter light. He measured it with his eyes, the way surveyors do, when they already know the sum. "Here's what I can do," Whitlock went on, warming his hands over talk more than stove. $50,000 cash, 24 hours. I lift the burden, you walk clear. Storm's coming. Best not to sit on trouble in bad weather. May's voice was small, but it went where it needed. "If it's worthless, why'd you beat the storm here so quick?" Whitlock's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. He turned it toward Jed instead. "Because I see potential where others see problems. And because I've learned men in thin times make heavy choices, I'm here to help you choose light." Jed let his hand come off the journal slow. He didn't step away from it. "Help's a big word. Only kind I carry." Whitlock's gaze fell, neat as a signature, to the precious key on the table edge, then to the black smudge on Jen's thumb, oil from the floorboard bundle. "You've been busy." "Just setting a hinge," Jen said. Whitlock's laugh made no sound. He didn't press the card again. He just set it on the table, squared its corners with the table grain. "Tomorrow this hour," he said. "Storm or no." He turned on the porch and drew in a lungful of cold, like a man claiming what he'd bought. The car gave a polite cough and rolled. Through the window, Jed watched the tail lights smear red across the yard. The driver didn't angle back to the road first thing. He idled a slow crescent that dragged 2 fresh tracks toward the oak before looping out like a hand reaching to touch something and pretending it hadn't. Inside, the light off those taillights found the silver sliver and laid a thin red line across the margin of Micah's book. Then it went, and the room was winter quiet again, the clock steadying itself for whatever came next. 50,000, May said, as if tasting the number and finding grit in it. Jed set the card on its edge and watched it fall. Sometimes a man offers to carry your burden 'cause he's the one who set it on you. He put his hat back on his head. "We best go see what that tree's been holding." They went before Whitlock's tire tracks could harden to law. The wind had a knife edge to it, shaving the meadow flat, piling drift where drift always wanted to be. The oak stood like it always had, shouldering weather without asking favors. Jed circled once, eyes learning the bark like a man reads faces at a poker table. The windward side was all scab and grit. On the lee, snow had scoured clean, and light lay different, thin, metallic. He took the silver sliver from his pocket and turned it in his fingers till the stamped star caught a scrap of sky. He tipped that scrap onto the bark, a cold, moving coin of light, and there, lifted out of shadow, Numbers came up the way a brand rises in steam on wet hide. He said them once in his head, and once out loud to make them real. May was already tracing them on the air with a glove finger, fixing them the way a schoolmarm fix a lesson, at the roots, tucked low where grass would hide it in any season but this one. Another line rode shallow and fine, like it hoped not to be found by anyone but kin, the treasures in the knowing, E.C. May's breath fogged and made a ghost of the words that vanished and came back as the cold took it. She taught how, not just where, she said, voice small and steady. Jed nutted once. He took 10 slow steps, out, and turned, looking back to see the path his boots had written. Then he came back and started over, the way a man does when he needs the count to sit right in his bones. 30 north, he said, and he walked them, heel to toe, each step a small promise. 20 west. He set the point of the shovel, leaned his weight, and felt the snow give, then the ground say no. The digging was work, and the work warmed them. In the ungenerous way winter allows. The top layer broke in plates, clean and blue. Below it the earth was iron hard, where the thaw had lied and fled. Jed lifted with his legs and not his back, old habits older than this place. May knelt and cleared the cut with her mitts, scooping side walls neat so they wouldn't slough. Buck lay down just close enough to be counted as help, and watched with eyes that didn't blink much. He dug through refusal and into something that sounded different. The shovel's lip shaved soil that had been turned once long ago and tamped back like a secret. Another foot, a heel of frozen mud, a scrape that set his teeth humming, and then the clear, ringing truth of steel answering steel. He froze the way you do when good luck comes sudden and you're afraid to scare it. The sound hung in the air a heartbeat longer than a sound should, then thinned and floated away across the meadow. May looked at him and he at her, and whatever lived between their fear and their want found a place to sit down. They cleared with their hand bare for a minute, because gloves blunted the meaning of edges, a lid, hinges, a seam meaner than any they'd seen in a bank town. The thing was bigger than a man's coffin and made not to move. Jed set his palms on the cold metal. It gave nothing, not even a sting. Beneath one hinge his thumb found the mouth of a keyway and felt the slow, certain weight of the fat key in his coat answer it, even through cloth. Not yet, he said to himself, more than to May. Storms and men both got meaner when you hurried. They backed out of the cut and kicked snow over what they'd revealed, the way you cover a fire to keep it. Jed stood and breathed, slow and counted, letting his heart come back to the pace a winter day can afford. The oak didn't speak, but the wind in it changed, quieter somehow, as if the tree was satisfied a message had been received. Far off, the sky darkened one shade deeper. They started for the house, walking the outward line of their own footprints. At the door, May paused and looked back, and the meadow looked plain as always, which was as safe as it ever gets out here. Inside, the air felt close from the heat they'd left behind. Jed set the silver on the table, the star up. The pendulum clock swung once, twice, then, without warning, stopped dead in its arc, the tick dying like a candle whispering itself out. All right, Jed said to the stopped room, so we're here. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. The stopped clock held the room like a held breath. Jed set the silver sliver star up on the table, then took the heavy key and put its weight in his coat. We move slow, he said. May nodded. Slow was the only speed winter trusted. Engines came thin through the cold, more than one this time. Headlights ghosted along the far fence, then washed the house in a pale sweep. Boots scuffed the porch. A polite knock, the kind that already knows the answer. Whitlock didn't bother with his card. He let his gaze fall to the table, to the silver star, to the dust ring where the journal had been. "Evenin'," he said, as if the word were money. Behind him, shapes in a coats took up the yard like punctuation. They walked out together into the pewter light. Wind skittered snow like broken glass. Whitlock didn't lead. He let Jed do the pointing, which was its own kind of leash. The oak hunched black in the whitening dusk. The cut they'd covered looked like drift until you wanted it to be. Jed kicked the snow soft away, not enough to boast, just enough to work. He knelt and found the keyway by feel, the way a man finds a saddle notch in the dark. The fat key took the lock like it had been married to it long before Jed was born. He turned slow. Metal answered metal with a deep-bellied thunk, the kind you feel in the ribs. Somewhere inside, a bar slid home to a new idea. Lanterns and 2 torches bloomed, fire puddled on dull steel. May kept her breath small and counted the hinges. Whitlock stayed just back of the light, warm hands in warmer pockets. 60 me, 40 you, he said, voice easy as wire. Tonight. Jed rose, snow skirting off his knees. "You need my signature, not my breath," he said, even. "Else you'll sell a fortune for pawn-shop nickels." Whitlock's smile showed teeth that didn't believe in winter. "I admire a man who knows his leverage." "Knowledge," Jed said, "not leverage." 2 of Whitlock's boys peeled off, and at his little tilt of chin, eased May and Jed back toward the house. "Combinations," Whitlock said. "Dates, numbers, wherever your uncle hid them. I'm a patient man until I ain't." Inside, the cold felt cabin warm after torch air. Jed went to the table, set his palm flat, and listened for the house's order of telling. The floor under the stove had the tight sound of good joists. Under the window, he found another board with a whisper in it. He slid his knife under the tongue and worried it gentle, the way you tease a knot from rawhide. The board came up with a sigh. Beneath lay oilcloth, a different bundle from Micah's, edges squarer, care tidier. He lifted it and the smell rose. Ink, machine oil, a hint of Ellen's soap. The knot broke clean. Inside, a notebook stamped plain, trusted dealers and auction. Pages neat with names, routes, appraisal notes in a hand that meant business. Tucked beneath, tied with red ribbon, a stack of Ellen's field notes, maps of dirty buys, names of men who moved money through land as if it were water, dates underlined and cross-referenced with a reporter's cold mercy. May slid the red bundle under her coat, close as a heartbeat. Jed opened the dealer index on the table just long enough for Whitlock, standing in the doorway, to see the spine, the tabs, the quiet certainty of a plan older than greed. Then he shut it and let his hand rest on it like a claim. Whitlock didn't step in. Snow hissed in the torchlight behind him. "That's a tidy book," he said. "Tidy books get men paid." "Tidy books keep men straight," May said, so soft you'd miss it if you didn't need it. Whitlock's eyes changed a hair, a coin flipping with no sound. He lifted 2 fingers. Outside, the yard rearranged itself. 6 men took places that would read as accidental to anyone who didn't know geometry. One shape lingered at the timberline, hood up, face a shadow that held still too long to be a friend. Jed felt May's sleeve brush his, a small steadying thing. In the doorway, the torch spat and settled. Whitlock's voice came easy, almost companionable. "Good. Now we're all reading the same page." Out past the porch light, the hooded figure didn't move, but the wind found the edge of his coat and lifted it once like a curtain. Rafe Larkin watched, eyes unblinking, a nail waiting to be the hammer. Whitlock's men walked them wide of the oak, past the fence half drowned in drifts, to where the barn had sunk to its knees. The roof line sagged like a tired mule. Ribs showed where boards had slipped. Wind threaded the broken slats and made a thin whistle of it. Somewhere under the eave, an old horse bell tapped itself once, Lengen lengen, like a memory trying to speak. Whitlock pointed with 2 fingers, a man too clean to touch things. "Third mark," he said. "Your uncle liked patterns." Jed let his eyes travel the wreckage without hurry, the way you do when ground can lie. May had the map open against her coat, gloved thumb holding down the corner, breath laying clouds over the pencil lines. Snow skinned the drift in a blue glaze. Jed set the shovel and drove the blade. It bit an inch, maybe 2, then chattered on stone hard and unmoving. He tried again, a step to the side, cutting a clean square. Bedrock answered with the same cold no, a voice without give. He straightened, shovel across his boot, and listened to the place. The wind sang through the barn ribs. The bell ticked once more and went still. May turned the map, not north up this time, but barn up, like a printer laying out type to read in the press. Her head tipped the way Ellen's had when she was solving a thing in ink. The drawn W wasn't a circle like the vault marks. It was sharp and squat, thrown down in a hand that expected to be understood by someone who shared its childhood. "Not warehoused pie," she said, small and sure. "Warning." Jed felt that word find the grain in his mind, and set. The W sat within sight of the lane and the timber line. It was where a rider could sit in shadow and see a man dig. It was where the bell would talk if you rattled the bones of the barn. It was place as signal, the sort of trick Ellen favored. Human, simple, hard to break. Whitlock studied their faces, read the change, and didn't like it. "Combinations," he said, that oil back in his voice. "Say them." Jed let his eyes go to the oak. Too far to help him now, but the memory of its backside, those slack, dark numbers, laid itself out plain in his head. He spoke slow, as if searching. 0, 3, 1, 5, 5, 2. He paused, then fenced with the next. 0, 8, 3, 7, 8. A digit bent where it oughtn't, casual as a man misremembering. Seconds bought are still time. Whitlock's mouth smiled, his eyes didn't. And the last? 0, 6, 1, 2, 0, 3, Jed said, letting the last 2 numbers limp a little. A man in a hurry hears only the shape he wants. Rafe Larkin hadn't moved from the timberline. He was a nail waiting to be used, the wind lifting his coat hem and laying it back down like a page someone meant to turn. His face was a shade among shades, but the stillness of him said the work he'd do would be clean and quick. One of the boys scuffed the bell with his boot, maybe by accident, maybe not. It answered with a sharper ring, and that small sound. A sound traveled strange across the frozen ground. The barn took it in and gave nothing back. Whitlock turned his head to listen. Men who think they own a place still listen when old iron speaks. May, Ellen's scarf high at her throat, hid the red ribbon bundle deeper under her coat. She kept her eyes on the map and not on Whitlock, and the not looking was its own kind of defiance. Jed shifted his boot and let a drift topple just so, burying the edges of their cut. He could feel the patience in him stretch like a rawhide thong pulled wet and tied to dry. The wind changed. It came off the trees carrying something heavier than cold. At first it was just a tremor under the skin of the air, a rhythm that didn't belong to weather. Then the hoofbeats found stone somewhere back in the trees and made that clean tok, 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 measured as a marshal's walk. Whitlock's men raised their heads the way deer do when a branch breaks where no branch ought to. May's eyes flicked to Jed. He didn't move. He let the sound build its own truth. From the snow-gloomed timber, one torch flared, then another, until a row of fires stitched itself along the dark light, catching the snow in slow orange sparks. The yard took that light and wore it, not friendly but fair. Whitlock turned, calculation sliding across his face like shadow under clouds. The bell answered the new weight of air with one thin note, more felt than heard. Rafe's head cocked a fraction, a wolf catching the change in scent. The torchlight walked out of the trees and began to own the yard. Jed set the shovel down quiet. The wind fell in around them, listening. Somewhere far behind, the pendulum in the empty house started up again, found its beat, and kept it. The torches came on like a string of small suns, sowing light across the yard until even the wind seemed to stand where it was told. Men in heavy coats rode out of the trees and took their places the way water settles, by habit and by law. No shouting, no flourish. A voice with gravel in it spoke once, steady as a plumb line. "United States Marshal," it said, "hands where we can live with 'em." Whitlock's mouth opened to argue, then thought better of it. His men shifted, one too fast. The answer came off screen, a short, flat crack from the tree line, another from the porch corner. A rifle clattered on hard snow. The yard tightened, then steadied itself again, like a horse that decides not to bolt after all. A woman swung down from a sorrel that breathed steam like a boiler. Her badge caught torchlight and threw it back, dull and convincing. "Nora Hale," she said, the name given like a ledger entry. "You boys from Consolidated will ease on down now." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Two deputies slid past Whitlock and unstitched guns from holsters without upsetting the evening any more than it was already upset. Rafe Larkin had melted 2 steps into shadow when the first torch bloomed. He tried one more, a shot, clean, economical, kissed his coat and found meat. He folded once at the waist, then straightened from pride and slid down a snowy cut, boots throwing chalky chips, a dark ribbon drawing itself behind him. He vanished into spruce with the caution of a bad prayer. The timber held its peace. May hadn't moved except to set a palm against Jed's sleeve. The horse bell under the eave gave a single lengthen, as if to count the souls left in the yard. Whitlock found his voice and tried a smile that had worked in warmer rooms. "Marshal," he said, breath fogging polite. "We were assisting an heir." "That'll do," Nora said. She lifted 2 fingers. Wrists were gentled behind backs with rope gone soft from use. "Mr. Crane, you've been on my blotter longer than I like to dust." A deputy stepped up with a canvas pouch the color of courthouse full folders. The seal was blue, old wax, cleanly cracked, and set again as if waiting. Nora took it, checked the mark, and turned to Jed as if they'd already met it in another season. "For you," she said, "from Micah Brewer, to be delivered if anyone pressed you with steel perlies." Jed took the envelope like a man takes a sacrament. 2 hands, attention paid. His breath fogged the paper's edge. May stood close enough that her lashes caught ice crystals, tiny white commas in the sentence of her staring. He broke the seal with his thumb. Inside, a neat hand that leaned forward the way Micah had written his whole life. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Jed read, lips still. Numbers first, because men who plan for winter plan in columns. $147,000. Appraisals attached. Buyers named plain as fence posts. Taxes already wrangled into their pen. Counsel engaged. A bank strongbox described by branch and box marked by a key sewn in a woman's things. He felt his pocket, where the weight of the heavy key sat like a quiet animal. Then the line that went through him, see. Knowledge moves it safe. Family keeps it true. Beneath it, another hand, finer, the ink firmer, Ellen's. A paragraph in her print about records and reckonings, dates and names, and what you do with the truth after you catch it. He couldn't make the words out for a breath or two. He put the back of his knuckles to his mouth, then tapped the silver sliver into his coat as if it could warm. May's voice was hardly sound. Mama wrote to keep folks not to count money. Nora nodded once, as if that was the only arithmetic that mattered. Micah paid to have this place watched over 15 winters, she said. Some of us moonlight. All of us remember. She glanced at the dealer ledger open, a thumb's width on the table inside, at the red ribbon bundle under May's coat. You'll walk this clean. Don't sign anything Mr. Crane ever heard of. It went quick after that, but not rushed. Rope, paperwork, the shifting of weight that means a night will end different than it thought. Whitlock kept his coat straight and his face careful. You can't make this stick, he said, but it sounded thin in torchlight. Maybe I can't, Nora said, but the judge can. She turned to a deputy and spoke low. Warrant on Rafe Larkin, assault with a deadly conspiracy, whatever else the papers fit, posted at town and the pass. The wanted writ grew itself right there in the cold, the pen scratching like a small animal. A deputy sanded it and blew. The grit glittered a second in the torchlight and fell like tame snow. Jed folded Micah's letter along its creases. He held it without hiding it. The numbers were big. The planning was bigger. He looked at May. She looked back, and whatever weight had held their shoulders down shifted its place. Not lighter exactly, but shared. Out under the spruce, the dark gave nothing back, but the blood flecks where Rafe had gone froze on the ice, small red seeds in a white field. They made a line fine and sure into the trees. Trouble, Jed thought, still breathing. By morning the torches were ash, the tire ruts drifted over, and the yard wore the quiet that follows a hard word spoken true. Nora's people stamped their boots, signed what needed signing, and left a copy of the warrant and the charges, as neat as fence posts. She tipped her hat once to May, once to Jed, then to the oak as if law could nod at trees. We'll close the file on the burn, she said, meaning the barn, if you're set to do it clean. Jed was. Some things you end by fire so the rest can grow, they edged. Straw and green boughs around the ribbed carcass of the building made breaks so the blaze would mind its lane. Snow stacked on the roof hissed like frying fat when the first flame took. The barn went up patient, boards answering boards, smoke drawing a slow black line into a white sky. Men stood hat in hand the way you do when a thing that sheltered you is leaving. Nora watched the column and nodded. Controlled, accounted for. On her say-so, a deputy inked closed on a square of paper and pinned it to the page with a brass fastener. Off-screen work, the best kind. Jed didn't look back much. He was already looking into the wind-sheltered swale south of the house site, a bowl of earth out of the teeth of the norther. If you listened, you could hear the place accept the idea of a home. By noon, Silas Tully had his traveling forge set. Fire kicking bright, the anvil ringing like a good bell. He turned out hinges warm as bread and strong as gossip. Each one he quenched in a bucket that steamed and smelled faintly of iron and creek water. Inside the old house, the air held a gentler cold. Jed and May set the table under the window, laid down a towel, and took apart Ellen's photo frame. The glass had spidered years ago. They lifted it free and brushed grit from the grooves with a paintbrush the size of a pencil. Jed burnished the walnut with a rag darkened by oil and lives. May set the picture true again and pressed the new pane home with the heel of her hand. Small work, wholly all the same. Paperwork came with its own weather. Doc Lafferty arrived with a satchel and a thermos and spread forms like maps. Trust papers plain enough a man could read them without being made small. Jed signed where he should, left blank what needed thinking, and kept his question short. Knowledge, not leverage. Doc nodded like a fence post taking a wire, tight but not mean. They logged Micah's letter with the bank, arranged the strongbox key proper, and made copies where copies were safer than originals. May walked a packet of Ellen's field notes to the local museum, gloved hands careful, and said, without speeches, what the papers were and why they mattered. The curator, a woman with ink on her thumb, looked at May as if someone had opened a window in winter and let in June. Out by the lane, Jed chalked a payboard on a scrap of painted door. Names went up, then hours, then wages owed. He hired 2 men who'd lost cattle and one who drank too much but hammered steady. Work steady's a man better than sermons. When the sun slid off the ridge, Jed walked into town alone, hat down, and pushed no-name envelopes under the hardware store's door, the feed shop's, and Mrs. Klein's place. Debts folded quiet, numbers exact. He didn't wait to see anyone read them. The snow kept his footprints easy until wind wrote them over. They set a little bell on the new gate. A small iron mouth Silas had poured. It rang when the wind shouldered the frame, not loud, just enough to tell you the world was still moving with you in it. At night, with the fire doing its gentle talk and the dealer ledger closed on the shelf, Jed took the silver sliver from his pocket and set it on the mantel beside Micah's letter. The stamped star looked like it had always belonged to evenings. Trouble wasn't gone. It had only changed rooms. Now and then, at the creek edge, Jed found hobnail prints where a man had stood and watched the house, the press of the heel turned slightly out like a signature. He covered them with his boot and said nothing. Word came down from Nora. A posse would ride the Juniper Pass in pairs till the thaw, leave a posting at the livery, check the back trails where a man could move quiet. Law is like winter. It doesn't hurry. It just persists. Work filled the daylight. The new house took shape fast under Silas's iron and the hands Jed hired. Sills set true, rafters shouldered together, a roof that would keep honesty in and weather out. May chalked a list on the pantry wall titled What We Owe Forward. She added things that weren't money, a shelf of readers for the school, coal for Mrs. Klein, 2 quilts for the Mahone boys. She didn't show the list to Jed. She didn't have to. When the last of the barn's embers sighed into themselves, Jed stood by the ash and warmed his hands over nothing, just to mark the change. Smoke made a thin blue thread toward evening. "Let the old burn," he said, not to be heard. "Give the new room." On the ridge, cloud bellies dragged and brightened. The wind pivoted. The gate bell found the new line of it and gave a single, clear length, long enough to hang in the air, short enough to mean the season is turning its back. Dawn came slow over Snowmelt Crossing, blue light pouring down the ridges, until the valley woke like a man who'd slept without fear. The new house in the wind-sheltered swale wore frost like lace. From the corral, horses blew steam that drifted and broke against the fence rails. Out beyond, 3,000 acres ran long and honest, under a sky trying on spring. Jed stepped onto the porch with a mug gone lukewarm and a heart that finally wasn't. He'd set the heavy key on a square nail by the door, hung it there like a charm, a small iron oath that what's given proper stays proper. Above it he'd fixed the silver sliver, Pressman's star bright as a thought, and with a carpenter's pencil wrote beneath, "Knowledge is the key." The words looked plain enough to be true even on days that weren't. The gate bell gave one easy note when the first breeze found it. Down the lane, wagon tracks led to the plank room that used to be a granary and now held benches, a slate, and a pot-belly stove doing its best. May had chalked a line across the blackboard. "Thank you, Ellen and Micah." She stood back to see if the letters were straight, then smiled in that quiet way that keeps a man upright. Children drifted in by 2s and 3s, boots clumping, cheeks lit by cold. Some carried readers with split spines. One brought a pencil shaved with a knife. They hung coats and arranged themselves with the care of folks stepping into a church that will forgive them for being late. May didn't make a speech. She set Ellen's donated notes on the teacher's table, a corner of newsprint showing where a byline had once run. "We'll start here," she said, tapping a map Ellen had marked with strong, small hands. Rail spurs, creek crossings, town lots. Bought honest and some not. She didn't say what the paper had cost. Truth has its own arithmetic. Outside, the little bell sounded again, as if to keep time for the lesson. Jed watched through the window long enough to see a boy raise his hand and not be afraid of the answer. He tightened the hinge on the school's back door, a hinge Silas had hammered and quenched, and slid a folded no-name envelope under another porch 2 doors down, where a widow kept her curtains just so. Later, he'd put a second envelope at the Mahone place, where the boys were lean and proud, and would take help better if money came in quiet. On the ridge, the pass held its hard line against the sky. Men change watch at Juniper Pass with the unspoken ease of folks who have learned that safety is work. Nora's posting weathered and flattened a little in the wind, and then held. Tracks at the creek edge showed nothing but deer and a fox with good luck on its side. Rafe Larkin was a name on paper and a set of eyes behind trees somewhere else, not here. Law takes the long road. Winter taught them how. Inside the Swale house, Jed set Micah's letter in a frame and placed it beside the ledger on a shelf a child couldn't reach. He didn't count the numbers anymore. He counted the uses: Cole and Mrs. Klein's scuttle, hinges that wouldn't give, a roof that turned weather aside without complaint, a school that warmed the room with words. He set Ellen's picture, glass, new, walnut rubbed to a soft shine, above the mantel where evenings could find it. By afternoon, the light thawed enough to wet the top crust of the drifts and send meltwater singing under the ice at the culvert. May walked home with 2 students hanging off her sleeves, telling her how a horse breathes in winter and how a stove can make a room feel bigger than it is. She listened like it was all news. On the porch, she read the words under the silver star, then looked up at Jed with that same plain smile. "I'll choose letters over gold, Pa." He nodded, slow as a vow. "Real gold's in what you know and who you keep." They went in before the cold remembered them. The day eased its shoulders and let evening happen. From the corral came the soft, satisfied noises of animals fed. In the schoolhouse, the stove ticked as it settled. The gate bell stirred once and was still. Snowmelt ran in the ditches like a first sentence finding its way. If a man stood quiet, he could hear the place speak, a low, content sound that belongs to land used right. Jed touched the heavy key as he passed, then the silver star, then the door jamb, as if blessing each in turn. Behind him, on the blackboard, the chalk thank you waited for morning. If this warmed you a mite, tip your hat. Drop a 0 so we know you're riding with us, and we'll take the next snowy trail together. When a story lays down right, it doesn't shout. It settles like snow on a good roof. If this ride eased your shoulders a little, like stove heat after chores, stay a spell. Tip your hat in the simplest way. Drop a 0 if the tale warmed you. Tap a 1 if you're ready for the next trail. Brand your mark on this outfit. Subscribe and ring the trail bell so you don't miss the quiet legends coming. Debts paid in silence, fences mended, the kind of gold that doesn't glitter. Till we ride again, keep a light in the window and your word good.